No, we're coming in shifts. I'm here Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday.
So 6:30.
I think Allegra's here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
We'll start in just a moment. A few of our students are in interviews at the moment, just outside, with some TV people, and then we'll be back in a moment. So start to turn to your neighbor and say something. What brought you joy this morning so far?
For me, it was my double shot of espresso.
Do you have to use the mic so you just chat among yourselves?
Oh, no, we'll chat amongst ourselves.
Okay, just so you know, everything that goes in the mic goes into the live stream. So.
Is this chat somewhere else now?
It is. You didn't read the emails, Manu.
I am the worst student ever.
Productive failure.
Yes, me too. So how do you reconcile chat and live streaming?
Sorry? That's what I asked.
I mean, some of the sessions are, we don't do all of the sessions, but we don't live stream the questions and answers. So, for example, if you speak freely, like, because everything else is rehearsed a little bit, so there's nothing that can, go wrong unless you want to make a bold statement. But then we can go, like, we'll go cut. And then, so mostly questions and answers, we don't stream live, so that's good. Okay.
Shall we?
Yeah, we've quieted down quite a bit. Okay.
Hi, my name is Maeve Louise. Most of you in the room already know me, but I have the honor of welcoming you to our 10 a.m. session, which is called Leadership Models for a Fragmented World. The guiding question for the session is, how can leadership across sectors and generations collaborate effectively? I have the honor of introducing some amazing guests. I'll begin with Dr. Carol O'Donnell, who's the Executive Director of the Smithsonian Science Education Center. Then we have Adnan Hassan, the Chairman of the Big Ideas Foundation and former board member of the World Bank Group. And last we have Professor Dr. Manu Kapoor, the Director of the Singapore ETH Center, a professor at ETH Zurich, and the author of Productive Failure, which is a great read if you are looking for a new recommendation. So I guess I'll jump right in. I'll start with you, Carol. I've got a question. How can leaders use science or evidence without... Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, and yeah, my co-moderator here is Anna Rold. She's the CEO and founder of Diplomatic Courier, and it's amazing to have her here. So back to you, Carol. How can leaders use science or evidence without alienating people who feel ignored or skeptical?
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges I think we have today is whether you can trust the information that you read. And we often talk about not truth, like what is true, but for what do we have evidence? So anytime anybody asks you a question, the thinking is, do I have evidence to support my response? And so the idea, for example, using science or science education to create kind of evidence-based reasoning or evidence-based thinking is crucial. In the past, we used to talk about information. Oh, where do you get your information? And this was prior to, of course, social media. And today, when we ask people, we don't always talk about information, we talk about misinformation. So information that is put out into the field that is not actually accurate, doesn't have evidence to support it. Then we started to say, well, it's not just misinformation, it's disinformation. So the information or malinformation, like information was intentionally put out there, knowing that there was no evidence to support it. And actually now we have contra-information. This idea that I'm putting something out intentionally to make you think one particular thing that has no evidence, and I know it has no evidence, but I'm forcing you to believe the other one. So when surveys have been done with youth, so your age, asking them, where do you get your information? Where do you think most information comes from for people your age?
I'm going to take a wild guess here and say social media.
Yes, yeah. But when asked the same question of what source of information do you distrust the most, guess what their response was?
Is it also social media?
Also social media. So in other words, we know where information comes from, We know the sources of information that we trust because they have evidence, and we know the sources of information that we don't trust because information that's often incorrect, doesn't have evidence, gets pushed out via social media the most. So I think in terms of science and trust in science and trust in whether information is accurate, this idea that making sure that it's evidence-based and that you understand how to reason from the evidence that you're reading. So.
That's very insightful, thank you. Adnan, I have a question for you now. What structural barriers would you say most often block collaboration from becoming funded scaled outcomes?
So if I can just comment on the earlier question, if you
Please
don't
go
mind.
ahead.
But I've been fascinated by this idea of empathy. The fact that you can walk in somebody else's shoes. And the moment you can feel empathy for somebody else, you see the world through their eyes. And if you see their world through their eyes, it may not be the world that you see through your own eyes. So the ability to have empathy seems to me like a very critical skill. And I don't know if we actually teach that in formal settings. But notice what you do in terms of friendships. You bond and you make friendships with people who you connect with, and you see the world through their eyes. And those are your friends and your buddies. The same thing scales up when it comes to business. There's a reason why in Silicon Valley, a majority of the funding for projects and investments that are global in their impact happens in a circumference of 20, 30 kilometers from the valley. They're globally invested companies, but everybody you're investing is there. And it's because the relationships. So once you strip away a lot of the structural issues about governance, about investment, balance sheets, income statements, project things, at the end of the day, it comes down to relationships, and relationships are driven by feeling. And feeling is something that is emotional, and it's connected to the ideas about empathy. On a balance sheet, relationships and the most important asset that a business person or an investor has are relationships. And go through a balance sheet and see where that line item is there. It's not there. The most important asset for an investor, for a business person, are relationships. They don't show up in a financial statement. So if you want to get back to this issue about structural things, it's relationships. Build relationships. And people are smart enough to figure out when you have a genuine, honest relationship and when you're faking it. So it's a philosophical comment, but you want to sort out the issues about structure and governance, invest in honest relationships.
That's really interesting, thank you. Manu, I have a question for you now. In complex systems, when should leaders experiment versus standardize? And what does, so to say, safe to fail look like in institutions?
So I'm going to do what Adnan did, hijack a little bit, because it's a very important point there, then I'll get to the complexity of things. So, when you're processing social media, so back to what Carol said, when things become effortless in your processing, when you feel, you can empathize with the situation, you know what's happening? You're being hacked. That's the process. The mind processes information that is more concrete, that's more relatable. And part of the reason why misinformation, disinformation, and now today I learned contra-information works is the path by which they get to you is by hacking the very things that are very important for relationships. So just be mindful of that. and turn it into an analytical tool and say, oh, I'm finding this very interesting, very relatable. Am I being hacked here? Just to put it out there, right? So it can be seen as a double-edged sword, and part of the critical literacy we need today is to understand when are we being hacked, based on the principles of how the human psychology works. Totally agree with you, yeah? Complexity. One of my bosses once said, if a system is sufficiently complex, you can reason anything out of it. I say that again. If a system is sufficiently complex, you can argue for any position from it. Yeah? So the idea then, therefore, is given sufficient complexity, the need to explore multiple perspectives is much greater than if a system is simple. Right? And how do you explore multiple perspectives is by trying. So imagine a tribe that's living, so I'm an engineer, so we solve optimization. We used to solve optimization problems, the valley problems. And if you're stuck in a valley, and there's no part of the tribe that's exploring, then you will forever stay in the valley, your resources will deplete, and you'll be dead. But if some part of your tribe, of your society, or of your community is actually exploring, going out to other valleys, figuring out what's out there, a bunch of that exploration will lead to failure, but maybe some of that may lead to success. And then you have other options that you build. And you can apply the same simple logic to whether you are learning something, how you're working in a team to solve complex problems, or how organizations survive in a competitive landscape. And depending on the industry, perhaps your balance point of how much you're exploring versus how much you're exploiting your capabilities is different. But as you increase the complexity, I think the need to explore more becomes very important.
That's amazing. Carol, back to you. I've got another one. What's one learning experience, in your opinion, that every decision maker should have to collaborate better, be it across generations or disciplines?
It is so hard to think about your question and all the wonderful things that have been said. So repeat the question, but I'm going to try to tie it also to these two previous comments.
So what's one learning experience that you think every decision maker or leader should have so that they're able to collaborate better across generations or disciplines?
Okay. So first of all, I think the fact that there are multi-sectors and individuals from different generations in the same room, like there is right now, is, first of all, the most important thing that we should do. We should never be trying to create learning experiences in which only one generation is in the room. Yes. And I think the reason that's important is because of what you heard from the previous two speakers. So this idea of whether it's empathy, which is tied to perspective taking, is really important. You can't be empathetic about someone else's perspective unless you understand their perspective. And so this idea of, if I am an adult, and I spent many of my years as a teacher, and I try to tell you something that I want you to believe, it's because I'm speaking mostly from my perspective. But the best learning experiences are one in which you try to understand one another's perspective, not only their individual beliefs, but also understand the idea from an economic perspective, an environmental perspective, a social or cultural perspective, even a political perspective. For me, I'm a science teacher, a science educator my whole life. Now run the Smithsonian Science Education Center, working globally with youth and teachers. And I think about science all the time. I see science everywhere. And I care deeply about environmental issues, climate resilience, et cetera. But if you don't think about climate science or other scientific issues from multiple perspectives, it's really hard to solve the problem of climate change, for example, without thinking about its economic impact or financial one or its social or cultural perspective. So the best learning experiences are one in which there are multiple generations in the same room, hopefully from multiple countries, or borders, right? So cross-border, cross-generational, cross-perspective. Those are the best learning experiences.
I have to agree with you there.
Maeve, you're doing such a good job, and I wanted to thank you for the questions. My questions usually are a lot simpler. You've weaved so much complexity into them. I've been hearing all of you, and across all of the themes, I go back to systems and how do they change. And my question to all three of you is, we right now have an incentive system that keeps things the way they are. What does that incentive system need to do to change in order for transformation to happen across leadership? And that, in a way, is what we're doing here today. We're changing the incentives for adults and next generation to dialogue together. But how can we change that incentive system across the board so that leadership can catch up at all levels? And this is a question for all of you. Thank you, Maeve, for giving me the opportunity to co-moderate with you. Who wants to take first?
Well, our ability, I'll go back to the basics of, trying things, and currently systems do not allow you to fail much. So I've visited labs, science labs across universities. You go and audit these labs, and you go around and say, well, okay, show me your projects, and projects tend to be very exciting, and you ask, look, how many of your projects are successful? And they'll say, oh yeah, all our projects are doing really well. And then you start to think, okay, are you a success lab or an innovation lab? Because if you're really pushing the boundaries, I tell you, 7 out of 10 ideas do not work. So if you cannot tell me what your failure signal is, if you don't even think you have one, then chances are you're still in that exploitation space. You're not exploring widely enough that will actually make a difference. So, and this is a question I've been asking both. You can ask yourself individually, if you want to know where you're really growing beyond your current capabilities, then your failure signal, if you can articulate, is where those spaces are. You can ask of it as teams, as organizations, as labs. So find out your failure signal. If you can get the failure signal into an incentive structure, and not failure out of stupidity, incompetence, laziness, right? Genuine failure that happens when you try to go for things beyond your skill sets and abilities. And if that can be turned into kind of an incentive structure, or at least something that we value, then I think maybe you start to push things a little bit.
Carol, you spoke about misinformation and social media. That's an incentive system that it's hard to break. Tell us more about that.
Unfortunately, there have been studies done that show that the social media posts that we are more likely to reshare are those that are the most, provocative. They tug at your emotions, and normally they shock the system, and so we're more likely to share them and therefore spread misinformation, disinformation, contra-information. I want to pull from something you just said to answer your question about incentivizing. We're talking about complex systems, but there is a difference between something that's simple, something that's complicated, and something that's complex. So unfortunately, I think in education systems, we often think about sharing information or engaging in learning and focusing on simple things that have one cause and one solution, and give every one of us as a student a false belief that we can predict what the result will be. But that's not true in a complex system. So a simple system, one cause, one solution. A complicated system, a little harder. Complex systems have multiple causes, multiple solutions, very hard to predict, and multiple paths to getting there. For me, I think in order to incentivize in complex systems and to innovate, you need to convince somebody that you and your perspective really is valued and matters. And I think I've seen that in these multinational events World Economic Forum is one example, where you, for the first time, will demonstrate to the people who come here every year why your perspective matters. Help them understand the value of your perspective as you build out this manifesto, so that we can say people can trust what you're sharing with them, and they will value your perspective and therefore incentivize change.
It's the same questions, yeah. You know, so we have a family foundation, and it's pretentiously called the Big Ideas Foundation. And our motto is big ideas and crazy people. Because small ideas don't really bend the arc of history, and quote unquote normal people don't do crazy stuff. So failure is in the very essence of that. If you have big ideas and crazy people doing it, you're going to have failure. But innovation doesn't happen without failure. Conventional stuff happens without failure. Innovation doesn't happen with failure. So if you have no tolerance for failure, pretty much guaranteed you have no tolerance for innovation. So the first incentive for change is to have tolerance for intelligent failure. That's the incentive you want to put. Like, look, we actually, exactly Manu, you said, if you show up and the guys are telling you 0 failures, no innovators. On the other hand, if people walk around with badges of pride for intelligent failure, now that's cool. The value of an entrepreneur rises when you find out, really, you've had 3 successful failures? What's a successful failure? It's a failure that was intelligently achieved. And you're like, dude, you really, your value to me has gone up because you've successfully failed. So for young people, I mean, absolutely be obsessed with pursuing successful failures. Go out there, take risks. This is not the time to do conventional stuff. And the timing in where we are in terms of the arcs of history, whoa, unbelievable. The rule-based global order, gone. If you doubt it, show up in Greenland and ask them. The concepts of money, which were fiat government issued, now it's algorithms. Concepts of money completely getting revisited. And if you thought the internet was sort of cool, it was prehistoric, what's coming around the corner is 10 to 100 times that with AI. All of these things are happening simultaneously, one on top of the other. The next 5 years are guaranteed to be absolutely phenomenal. And you guys are stunningly privileged to be entering into that world. So please, none of you walk out there with conventional stuff. You gotta be out there doing crazy stuff. So to me, if you're walking around with badges of the next 5 years, may you be very, very successful in the wild things that you do. But if you fail at a couple of the wild things, fantastic.
Thank you. You know, there was a reason I asked that question. I have 2 kids your age, and as I go in stages worldwide, I get asked about the public crisis we're in right now. There's crisis happening everywhere. And my answer is, well, it's time to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is now the new normal. It's been the new normal for half a decade. And you know who's very comfortable being uncomfortable? You guys. So when it comes to intergenerational debate, this was the question I wanted to ask, and you kind of touched upon it with productive failure. But really, it's this ability to be agile. So before we get you to be too comfortable with everything, continue harnessing that thing, that talent you already have on your own. So Maeve, thank you for indulging me, but yes.
Of course, super insightful questions and responses. Thank you so much.
Should we open it up
Yeah,
to the
sure.
audience at all?
So if anybody has any questions for any of our speakers, please let me know and I'll come bring a mic to you.
Remember, crazy people ask crazy questions.
It's open mic.
So if you have multiple interests in life, like, do you like computer science, do you like making games, but you want to build drones, or you want to study business, like what is one advice you would give to kind of shape it into one, I don't know, not an interest, but a goal, maybe?
Just very I think it's this idea that in the past, we thought about what one particular area do you want to study? Is it computer science? Is it life sciences? But today, you just described the ideal individual who's heading off into the future. Someone who approaches learning from a very transdisciplinary approach. Because we were talking about complex systems which have multiple causes, therefore multiple solutions, require someone with knowledge from multiple perspectives, multiple disciplines. So it feels like students that are the most successful are those that are doing exactly what you just described. The question is like, how do you actually accomplish it? You only have so many hours in the day. But it's this idea of taking two different interests, majors, that are so different from one another, but that you uniquely will bring them together, because there is a complex problem out there that exists that requires both of those skill sets, or all three of those skill sets. So I just wanted to say that's the learner of the future, is someone who has expertise in multiple disciplines.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So if I could build on that. Oh, that's me. Okay. The echo, right? I have several PhD students, and they come from all backgrounds. Some are computer scientists, some are mathematicians, biologists, neuroscientists. And invariably, in the early stages of their PhDs, when we ask them, define a problem that you'd want to take on for your PhD, the mathematician defines a mathematical problem, the computer scientist defines a computer science problem. And it takes a long time to get them to think about shifting the starting point not to the expertise that you have, but to think about the problem that you want to solve. Yes. Right? So to you personally then, the question would not be, should I study computer science or economics or art history and so on? Chase a problem, chase something that you want to solve, you want to be, that right now that you're passionate about, and organize your training around that, as opposed to, here's what I'm generally interested in. That's also a viable path for very good reasons, because you will sort of develop this interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity that puts you in a good stead. But if you have the privilege and the capacity and the means to really think big and crazy, go for a problem. And then you work towards it. Get everything possible to work towards the problem. I'll just add one more thing. Transdisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity does not mean that you have to know it all. You can still have a couple or two or three major deep dives in you, like major capacity, major expertise areas in you, but you're sufficiently broad that you can talk to other people. Yes. I think that capacity also needs to be developed. So both go deep and sufficiently broad that you can talk to other people, because that's how you bring a group of people together to solve the problem.
When I ask questions about things, it just rarely fits within like one single field of engineering or any subject. So sometimes I try and do too much that I burn out in the problem, and sometimes I can't find people that can help me, especially right now.
You're describing a very normal process. It's only by going beyond what you can, you figure out where your boundaries are, and then you push back and recalibrate and get other people to help you. That's normal. That's not abnormal. And also, your bachelor's or your high school and your bachelor's and your master's, I started out as playing football, then turned into an engineer, went into the industry, did a degree in right? As a professor of learning sciences. So you're just starting out, right? Just let the passion and the problems that you want to pursue drive it, and take the next steps accordingly. Go for computer science, engineering, economics. Everything is available to you. Think in the long term.
Thank you very much.
Do you ever take long walks alone?
In the morning.
Excellent. The more intense you are, the more important it is to have the ability to be alone and quiet. So if you are really intense and like the system internally just constantly pushing you to drive, you got to compensate that by this learned skill of silence. That's where answers come to you, and in some ways, the universe speaks to you. And if you don't make that space for those walks or those sails or the meditation or the mindfulness, you're not going to make the space for the universe to give you the messages that it's been trying to get through to you. So I'm delighted that you take the long walks in the morning. Keep it up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Everybody, can we please get a quick round of applause for our amazing speakers? Unfortunately, however, I think we're almost out of time, but thank you all so much for joining us. All of your insights were so really wonderful. Thank you.
So